Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're headed to Decatur, Illinois, 1996, a case that really shook this small town and grabbed national headlines. The murder of Karen Slover.
A fascinating case, really. Small town, brutal crime, those always grab your attention.
Absolutely. And we're diving deep using an episode of the Anatomy of Murder podcast as our guide. It's a wild ride. Get ready.
What's so interesting here is Decatur's image, soybean capital of the world, Midwestern, quiet, then bam, this gruesome murder.
Yeah.
Doesn't quite fit, does it?
Nope, not at all. It's a reminder that even in those peaceful places, you can find darkness.
Yeah.
Now, about Karen Slover, 23 years old, single mom. Worked at the local paper, but she dreamed of being a model.
Holding on to those dreams, that detail is going to be important later when we look at possible motives.
Good point. So September 27th, 1996. Karen leaves work. It's about 5 p.m. She's going to pick up her 3-year-old son from his grandparents. But she never makes it. Hours later, a cop finds a car she often drove abandoned on the interstate.
Abandoned how?
Engines running, lights are on, driver's side door wide open.
Yeah.
It's something out of a movie.
Staged. Has to be. Try to make it look like she was taken. Classic misdirection.
Inside the car, they find Karen's purse, her ID thing she wouldn't just leave. Oh, and another thing, cinders. Little bits of burnt coal.
Cinders.
Yes, cinders. Keep that in mind. It becomes a major clue later.
A burnt offering, perhaps.
2 days later, a boater's out on Lake Shelbyville, makes a horrific discovery. A garbage bag, and inside, Karen's head.
Oh, that's rough.
More bags turn up, each one with a different part of a body, some weighted down with concrete.
Dismemberment, weighted bags. Someone planned this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing.
And guess what? More cinders, embedded in some of the body parts. The duct tape on the bags, animal hair, not human. Autopsy showed she'd been shot 7 times, all in the head. .22 caliber.
Overkill, they call that. 7 shots. That's personal, pure rage. Someone wanted her gone, and they wanted to be absolutely sure she was gone.
So where do investigators start? With the people closest to Karen, of course. First up, her ex-husband, Michael Slover Jr. Their divorce was messy. Custody battles, accusations of abuse. He was a prime suspect.
Makes sense. History of conflict, potential motive. Ex-husbands are always high on the list in these cases.
But here's the thing. Michael Jr. had what seemed like the perfect alibi. He worked multiple jobs that night. Security guard, bouncer, karate instructor, and people from each place put him there. He even ran into a cop he knew during a traffic stop.
Wow, talk about being in the right place at the right time. Almost too perfect, wouldn't you say?
It was a little suspicious, right? Was it luck or something more calculated? Next up, Karen's boyfriend at the time, David Swan. He was driving the car she was last seen in, and he did the whole tearful plea for her safe return on TV.
Public appeals, huh? Sometimes genuine, sometimes not so much.
Right, and Swan's behavior was odd. He even showed off a card he claimed Karen gave him, but it was a lie.
Oh, trying to appear closer to the victim than he really was, that's always a red flag.
Then they found out Swan owned a .22 same caliber as the murder weapon, and he had a history of some unsettling behavior.
A .22, you say? And what kind of unsettling behavior are we talking about?
One incident stuck out. He hung a deer carcass over his swimming pool and butchered it with a chainsaw.
Okay, that's a bit much. I mean, not direct evidence, but paints a picture, doesn't it?
Totally. Swan did have a 45-minute gap in his alibi that night, but ATM footage placed him somewhere else during that time. Cleared him, but the whole thing felt off.
Cleared, but not necessarily innocent. Sometimes people slip through the cracks, Lack of evidence, a well-constructed lie, it happens.
So, we've got the ex-husband, we've got the boyfriend, both seemingly in the clear. The case hits a wall. Then a tip comes in that changes everything. It points the finger at an unexpected group, Michael Jr.'s parents. Karen's former in-laws, Michael Sr., and Jeanette Slover.
Whoa, that's a curveball. The in-laws? Talk about shifting gears in an investigation.
Totally. And the tip itself was simple, but the timing? Well, that's what made it suspicious. A neighbor reported seeing the Slovers cleaning and burning stuff at their car lot, Miracle Motors, right after Karen vanished.
Cleaning and burning, huh? Sounds like an attempt to get rid of something incriminating.
And there's more. They'd been told to clean up that lot before, multiple times, but always ignored it. Why the sudden urge to tidy up right when Karen disappears?
Guilt. Panic. Maybe they thought they could erase the evidence.
Maybe. So investigators searched Miracle Motors. Guess what they found?
Let me guess. More cinders.
Bingo. More cinders. And pieces of concrete similar to those used to weigh down the bags in the lake.
Ooh, getting closer. But was there enough to link the cinders and concrete to those found with the body?
Sadly, no.
Oh.
Tests were done, but they were inconclusive.
Ah, bummer. So close. But if they couldn't conclusively link them, what else did investigators have to go on?
Well, for starters, the in-laws couldn't provide alibis for the night Karen disappeared. They claimed they couldn't remember where they were or what they were doing.
Convenient, I don't recall, is never a good look for someone close to the victim, especially when other evidence is pointing in their direction.
Exactly. It raised a lot of red flags. And for 2 years, that's where things stood. The case went cold. Then enter Richard Monroe, a forensic geologist. He proposed a pretty radical idea.
A forensic geologist. Now, that's not something you hear every day. What did he have in mind?
An archaeological dig at Miracle Motors. He thought even tiny bits of evidence overlooked before could tie the Slovers to the murder.
Talk about a long shot. But hey, sometimes you got to think outside the box, right? What did they find? Did this forensic geologist work his magic?
It was a long and tedious process. Investigators spent months sifting through buckets of soil, looking for anything that could connect back to Karen. Remember those jeans she was wearing when she was found?
The ones that were a rare brand and size.
Yep, those are the ones. They figured if they could find anything that matched them, it would be huge. And then they got a hit. A fly button in the soil. A perfect match to Karen's jeans.
A fly button? Seriously? That's incredible.
Talk about finding a needle in a haystack, right? But they weren't done. They also found rivets that matched Karen's jeans, a button that matched her blouse, and get this, dog hair that matched one of the Slovers' dogs. Canine DNA testing confirmed it.
Wow. The dog hair, the buttons, the rivets. They were building a pretty strong case against the Slovers, so what did they think happened?
Investigators theorized that Karen was lured to Miracle Motors under false pretenses, maybe by someone she trusted. Then she was murdered, dismembered, her body dumped in the lake, and her car was staged to look like an abduction.
Chilling. And the motive? What did they think drove the Slovers to do such a thing?
Control. The prosecution believed the Slovers were obsessed with controlling Karen's son and cutting Karen and her family out of his life completely.
Control. Over a child. Sadly, not as uncommon a motive as you'd think. People do terrible things when they feel like they're losing control, especially over something as precious as a child.
And don't forget, Karen had that modeling job lined up out of state. The prosecution believed that was the trigger for the Slovers. They were afraid she'd take their grandson with her.
Makes sense. They were losing their grip on the situation, they were losing control, and they did something drastic to stop it.
After Karen's death, the Slovers went to great lengths to limit her parents' access to their grandson. They even arranged for Michael Jr.'s sister to formally adopt him.
Trying to erase Karen from the picture entirely.
It was a tough case for the prosecution to prove. Even with all the circumstantial evidence, there were still gaps. But they had to convince a jury that all these pieces fit together to tell the story of the Slovers' guilt.
Circumstantial evidence is a tricky beast. You have to build a strong narrative, connect the dots, and leave no room for doubt. Did they manage to do that?
So the prosecution had laid out their case. Now it was the defense's turn. And as you might expect, their strategy was to try and convince the jury that Karen was the victim of a random act of violence, a stranger abduction gone wrong.
A pretty common defense tactic when there isn't a lot of direct evidence. Create doubt, suggest alternative scenarios, hope the jury buys it.
Right. But the prosecution had done their homework. They were ready for this. They immediately pointed out the flaws in that stranger abduction theory. They emphasized the overkill, how the brutality of the murder pointed to something much more personal, not some random attack.
7 shots to the head. That's not just about silencing someone, it's about rage, about sending a message.
Exactly. And they kept hammering that point home. Nothing else supported the stranger abduction theory either. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no ransom demands, none of the usual hallmarks of that type of crime.
They were dismantling the defense's narrative, piece by piece.
And then they brought up Michael Jr.'s alibi again, the one that seemed so airtight at first. Remember that seemingly chance encounter with the cop he knew? Well, the prosecution suggested that maybe it wasn't so coincidental after all.
Ooh, going after the alibi, that's a bold move.
They argued that Michael Jr. might have orchestrated that whole encounter just to make sure he had a witness to back up his story.
Premeditation. If they could convince the jury of that, it would change everything.
It definitely made the jury think twice. And then they brought out that tiny piece of evidence that had been found in Miracle Motors, the fly button.
The one that matched Karen's jeans.
That's the one. They had expert witnesses explain just how rare that button was, how unlikely it would be to find another one just like it.
It's like the prosecution was saying, Okay, you can try to explain away all the other evidence, but how do you explain this?
It was a powerful moment. They had connected Karen to the Slovers' property with a tiny but incredibly significant piece of evidence. And after days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty. All three Slovers were convicted of first-degree murder and concealment of a homicidal death.
Guilty on all counts. And the sentence.
60 years each. It was a victory for justice, but it couldn't bring Karen back. A young woman lost her life, a son lost his mother, and a community was left to grapple with the darkness that had been hiding in plain sight.
It's a case that really makes you think, doesn't it? About the secrets families keep, the lengths people will go to when they feel like they're losing control, and the importance of never giving up on the search for truth.
This is why we do the deep dive, to explore these complex cases, to learn from them, and to remind ourselves that sometimes the most ordinary-looking places can harbor the darkest secrets. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
And if you're interested in learning more about this case, we encourage you to check out the Anatomy of Murder podcast episode that we use as our source material. It's a fascinating deep dive into the investigation, the trial, and the aftermath of this tragic case.
Until next time, keep those minds curious, and we'll see you back here for another deep dive into a real-life mystery.